Hey everybody, it's been a hot minute. Sorry, just finishing getting. I am so excited to make this video that I've just been trying to discipline myself to slow down the process. I actually wrote an outline, and yes, this is me wearing a dress. You want to see? Like I always wear jeans, but look at woo! Maybe this is perfect because this is the story that I'm going to tell you involves the innocent eternal child archetype. So everyone has a different inner child archetype that got wounded. Some people have a very overt wounded child that they lead with, and other people lead with the magical child, the nature child. Mine is the innocent or eternal child. Um, mine gets a bad rap, a really bad rap, because all that's known or usually said about it. Hi, Max. He'll join us here in a minute. Um, because it's their refusal to never grow up. But anyway, so here's what I'm going to do. Here's my little outline. I'm going to talk about what is a trigger and what is the work. How do we do the emotional healing? And what is adulting? What really is adulting? And why is this such a connection? Okay, I know I'm connected. Yep. Okay, let's try connect. Maybe that'll help. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to go through the stages of when I get triggered. I'm so triggered. Oh my God. Like, what do I do? I just have this overwhelming urge to blame somebody. It couldn't be my fault because I'm so triggered. Okay, so what is a trigger? Max feels bad because I had to scold him earlier. It's okay. I love you. A trigger is when you have an out of proportion emotional response to an event, and it's usually with our intimates. Somebody triggers us, somebody says something, and we just fly into our wound. What we're doing is we are re-experiencing a trauma. And so those around us are like, "Oh my God, what happened to her? She just really kind of went off her nut and da 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 da." But what's coming up is trauma. You're having a trauma response. Trauma has been normalized, and we tend to skate over it and swallow it down. Damp it and damp it and damp it and numb it. But when it comes up, when you have trigger, it's a massive opportunity to really shift something permanently within yourself. So how do you heal it? So I will tell the story. And my sister-in-law also has the eternal child archetype. And you tend to find other inner child archetypes that are similar to yours, both because they trigger you and because you feel safe with them. So what happened this morning is that she was sharing how she got triggered by something and then went directly to the sadness. Now, Janet has a PhD in inner child work. And I mean, not technically, but actually. So she knew to go for the gold immediately. And that's what we all want to go for, is to be in the present. Oh, I'm feeling hurt. Where is that coming from? This is my smoothie. So it reminded me of the time when I went through this last September, or I was taking a walk and I was unearthing, it wasn't September, I was unearthing this eternal child aspect. And just yesterday, my mind was reflecting back to times that I thought my older brother Dave he's 7 years older. And when I was little, or even into my early adulthood, I would share something and he would repeat the word. And I thought he was reflective or active listening me. And on some level, he was. But what he was doing was using that to make fun of me. And his favorite way to do that was to do it on the sly without me knowing. And so I was just remembering that experience of being made fun of. And Janet's wound was being excluded. And you bring out this innocence and say something, and then they make you feel stupid. And it's just an innocent, sweet thing. But what's happening is you're triggering their wound, their fear of vulnerability. So then they bully, they harm. And this is a side subject, but the bullying and the cruelty and the initial thing that happened is always from somebody who is just misled. They're just misinformed about who they are and what they deserve. So they're acting from an unconscious wound and then they project it out there so that they don't have to feel it. And then it repeats and repeats. Unless we are a gatekeeper and we say, no, I'm going to take this like the football of blame, as Chogyam Trungpa says it, I'm going to take it out of circulation. I'm going to take it apart and actually deal with it. It's like passing on a disease, and you take it, you stop it, you break it down, you give it what it needs, and you send it away so that it doesn't get propagated. So the stories matter so much because then you can put yourself, the mirror neurons get activated. So for me, it was being made fun of, and I was identifying this defense mechanism that I had where I would pretend to be dumber than I actually was. When I was onto the fact that I was being teased or made fun of, I would go further into the dumb. And I realized I was prostituting myself because just a little bit, but with awareness, so that I could keep you in the delusion. There's a real darkness here. I'm going to keep you in this delusion while I'm in the light, and I'm going to continue to feed you this, prostitute myself, like placate you so that you don't know. I won't reveal my position. You won't know that I'm aware of what you're doing because I'm not ready to stand up for myself and do the next step, the next most self actualizing, taking charge of myself, the healthiest. What's the next healthiest thing I could do in this interaction of being bullied? Well, when you're a child and you're receiving whatever, abuse or trauma, most people don't have the wherewithal to respond to that in a healthy way. So I was going back and I was sorting through this. And I began to say to him, okay, what do I really need to say to him? Let's just pretend that I can go back and I can talk to him. And so my adult went back and I stood between him and my inner child. And I said, I know that you are making fun of me because you can't afford to be aware of this vulnerable, innocent child energy in you because yours got used and abused. And so you are trying to get me to bury my innocent inner child energy because it makes you feel vulnerable. So, what's the quickest way to do that is to slap it, make it run away, make it hide, make it not want to come out again. And this fits into the narcissist grid as well. Your authentic differentiated behavior is threatening to them. So they got to shut it down the fastest way they know how. And it's usually cruelty or attack. So, in further talking to Dave, I was like, okay, you know what? When we don't know how to respond in a healthy way to, abuse or trauma, like I know as a perfectionist, I beat myself up about that. And you do what's available to you in the moment. And maybe what's available was my little strategy. I didn't know what I was doing. I have just figured it out this morning. I've been trying to figure out that defense mechanism for decades, and I just figured it out this morning. And so I'm like, okay, that was brilliant. That was a great strategy. And it involved not being ready to really stand up and protect myself and be in my sovereignty. So maybe another strategy would be to walk away and leave and just, I'm not going to share myself with you anymore because it's not safe. And it's progressing ultimately to, I don't give a fuck what anybody does or says about my inner child. And see, the fuck in there indicates there's a little anger in there. But like in Zarathustra, the Zen Osho card, where you're evolving from the dull, sleepy, unconscious camel into the lion roaring its truth. That's where the fuck comes from, and then it eventually moves into the innocent child, who is just like, I'm just gonna do my due here, and I'm just not. I'm immune to being hurt because I want to be here. I love being here. This is where I'm the most connected to the infinite. So, yes, in my most evolved state, I was analyzing Dave and I was saying, here's your problem. Here's what you're doing to me. This is your strategy to try to get me to bury. And I'm not going to bury this part of myself anymore. I'm going to protect her. I'm going to take care of her. And I'm going to create a safe space as often as I possibly can for her to express herself. Because that eternal child archetype to me is my magic. That is my conduit to magic and to the divine and to my own creativity, my own wonder. She's always in the present. She's endlessly optimistic, hopeful, creative, eternally creative. And when I went through the process of uncovering all of this and going through a grieving process, it took me a really long time to get to the place of just carrying her around with me in my day-to-day life, staying in the present with her and looking through her goggles at the world and being amused and delighted. I've spent a lot more time there than I ever have in my life. But how did I get there? So I'm going to break down the steps now using my story as an example. Number one, you have a trigger. You're having an out of proportion emotional response to some event. The first thing to do is to observe that you are. I am triggered. Then you remove yourself from whoever it is, and maybe you inform them, I'm really triggered right now, and I'm going to remove myself because I don't trust myself to be in the present with you. I'm probably going to be trying to fix my trigger with you through blame and anger and all kinds of stuff that, isn't really appropriate here. So you observe it, and then you see that there's an overwhelming urge to blame. I gotta blame somebody. Give me some blame. I gotta find who's culpable. This is obviously your fault. This couldn't be my fault. And that urge to blame when you're in the middle of a trigger is overwhelming. And just watching my daughter go through a very mild version of this while I was in Portland last weekend, I said, in your urge to blame, is there a victim in there somewhere? And she goes, yeah, kind of tentatively, because the victim gets a bad rap. But guess what? A victim is somebody who is experiencing something that they don't have the power to stop. And that happened when we were children. It happens to us as adults. We are victims of things. Okay, but that's not where it ends. It doesn't just stay there. I'm a victim and that's all there is to it. You identify. So I said to Crystal, you were a victim of what? You were actually a victim of something. Let's identify that. So that's where the next step, okay, first, trigger. Second, observe. Third, dig. What happened? When did I feel like this? And this is where you develop the skillfulness of observing and feeling at the same time. You are having an overwhelming feeling and you track it while you're having it. And the best way to track that is body awareness. Where am I having this feeling? That keeps you grounded and keeps you in the present. And you have this conversation. This is called inquiry. Where am I feeling this in my body? What does it feel like? What memories are coming up? And just by asking the question, like say all you can do is say, all I want to do is blame right now, an overwhelming urge to blame. You can send an intention into your deep psyche and just say, I have an intention to figure out what's going on here and to take responsibility for my own healing. I have an intention to find that part of me that is having a trauma response. It is my intention to identify the trauma and heal it. And then you can let it go if you can, and it's amazing. This chemical computer takes that intention and works with it and spits out an answer in time. Okay, so say you're digging, you're feeling. This is taking me back to this, okay, this is how it feels. And you talk it out. You use the current situation. Okay, and this is the Byron Katie work where you go into the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. Go to her site, The Work, or Byron Katie, Byron. And you go through that worksheet, and that is making use of the current situation. I'm so mad at my partner because blah. If they would only blah, they always blah, blah, blah. They never blah, blah, blah. Those words always and never, that's the inner child talking because they don't have a sense of this is going to pass. They think it's forever. So you let that part of yourself talk and you don't censor yourself. And that's what holds a lot of people back is that they get outside their own experience. Like they have an argument with their husband and then they go away and they're steaming. And then you start to label yourself according to how you think your husband sees you or the typical things that he says. Oh, she's so self-absorbed. It's always about her. She's pouting. She's, you know, then you've just lost track of yourself and the process. You've just ended the process because you're over here now looking at and judging. And it's just an attempt to do something to fix it. But that's not where the work is. You get back over here and you get as petty as you can and you say, if only he, and that's what we do sometimes when we're talking with friends. Really productive. You take a walk. So you're doing EMDR. You're talking to a friend. You're like, he said this and then I felt this and da da da. And why doesn't he ever? And hopefully that friend can kind of help guide you into your own body and your own experience and said, you were really feeling this, weren't you? So to be a good friend, try to keep it on you were really feeling this. This is what hurts. And you want to get to the hurt under the anger. So this is where the book NVC comes in handy, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Because if you can get to the core feeling under the anger and the blame, this feels powerful. So we prefer the anger and the blame. What's under it is vulnerability and hurt and trauma. And that's vulnerable and it doesn't feel safe for us to be there. But if we can create a safe space to say, okay, what happened? So you're accessing it through the funnel of your present experience. Oh, he's so arrogant. He always does this. This is my dad. Good. Now you're getting closer. How did my dad make me feel this way? And your chemical computer will throw up a memory and you go with it. You trust it. You keep getting closer and closer to the core. What is the belief about yourself that you signed on to? That's the abandonment. That's the real trauma. How did I abandon myself? And get into their story about, oh, isn't she silly? Oh, that behavior is going to cause her to be rejected. So I have to judge it. I can't be that anymore. It's that self-abandonment that's the trauma. That's you're like dissociating and pushing a part of yourself out, suppressing it, burying it. And that hurts. That's really painful. So when you undo that belief, and you're like, oh, this part of me is great. I love this part of me. I'm going to reintegrate this back into myself. So where were we with this process? The grief work. The sadness and the grief work of once you get down to the bottom of it can take a long time. For me, this took months, and I went into a mild version of PTSD last fall. And I had to cut myself off from all of my relationships. I stopped giving readings. I stopped going to my women's group. There was one woman that I was talking to periodically. Everyone else had to go. Because I needed that much space. I didn't know if I was going to go into that same kind of prostituting myself behavior and setting myself up to get laughed at or ridiculed. And even if somebody was just kind of, how you sort of make fun of each other and it's in love and like, oh, you're adorable or whatever. But actually, that was not okay in that moment because it's like, this feels like belittling, or at least it's causing me to belittle myself because that's what I was being asked to do as a child. And I can't be around that anymore. So anyway, the grieving period can take a long time where you really, really feel the pain of what happened. And you are the most important person. You're always the most important person. If you're in any kind of trigger or upset or any kind of situation, ask that question, who's the most important person here? And if it's anyone other than yourself, you're not in your own experience. Why do I go over here to the left side of my body? Interesting. So, the grieving, you have to honor the grief process, the sadness, the vulnerability, and it can't be like feelings of, I mean, anger is good, it's healthy, but who and what are we angry at? The anger is like this, it's a protective thing. Sometimes it's a pokey thing that sits on top of the wound that says, don't come near me, and sometimes that's what we need. Or sometimes it's anger at the injustice, anger at the abuse, anger at this thing that was done to me because I didn't deserve this. I was this innocent child. That's part of the experience. But the more core experience is the grief, the pain, the sadness. I'm so sad that this happened to me. You cry, you do. That's the work, is to feel all the things that were unfelt that still need to be felt. It's just a backlog. You just weren't staying current. It's a backlog. Okay. So then comes the stage of adulting, the stage of how can I take responsibility to parent and protect my inner child? How can I have the ability to respond in a way that is tracking what needs to happen? So rather than externalizing this responsibility, which a lot of movements today seem to be doing, is it's your job to make me feel safe. No, it's not. We can be a bridge or a conduit for each other, but that ultimately that work is for the individual to do. So the adult says, okay, I'm going to protect this part of me. When I first went through a repressed memory experience, in the span of time between what I figured out was going on after an entire weekend of extreme anxiety attacks, no idea what it was, that was the worst part of it, is I had no framework for what was happening. And usually we do have a framework, and it's usually wrong. We're projecting it on something out there, politics, husband, ex, whatever. I'm being victimized, but there's something else because we're not ready to own it. Well, this was this really touchy place between, I have nothing to project this onto. I can't even pull out of my imagination what this could be. And that's a very scary place to be. We feel like we're losing our mind, our sanity, because we don't understand, we don't have a framework. And I do think that has something to do with anxiety, sanity, my reality, my ability to interpret reality. All those things are connected in there. So I was there for a couple of days. And what held me together was watching videos of a mother orangutan holding her baby and holding her hand out to the world saying, "You can't touch my baby." This baby was crawling around on her like she was playground equipment, and this mother was 100% tolerant of this infant's need to just her the mother's body was the world of this little baby, and she was like, you know, other monkeys were trying to toy with her, and there we know the viciousness of a mother animal to protect that child. And that's the level of protectiveness that we need to have with ourselves. Not that we're vicious, but if the need arises, can we be? And the need to be vicious is very rare, I think, but to just have good, clear boundaries, to be sovereign. I'm in charge here, and I'm simply going to take the action that is required to protect this vulnerable part of me. So how can I take responsibility? And that's when I went back and I had that conversation and I said, what's the highest level of healthiness, healthy differentiatedness, healthy parenting that I have access to in this moment? And then I talked to him. I talk to him periodically in my mind, never to him because he's not safe. It's totally not safe. And that's just how some relationships are. Yeah. Sometimes the only way to win with a narcissist is not to play. So, but we do need to have conversations with that part of us that has introjected their messages into our own psyche in an effort to survive, make it through. So, yeah, the healthiest thing I could reach for was to come to the understanding and compassion that he was striking out from a place of not feeling safe himself. And this was, in fact, an unconscious attempt at making himself safe. So the bully is an unconscious parent. That's profound. It's just an unconscious parent. So next time you see bully behavior, just think, what are you trying to protect? What does this person represent to you that you feel is not safe to expose? So, anyway, that's it. That's pretty much it. Those are the steps to handling a trigger from beginning to end. And like I said, it can take months. This process can take months. The grieving process for me took about a month or two to come out of a kind of a PTSD state where now that this part of me had been excavated and I was inviting it back into my psyche to be integrated. For me, the eternal child archetype is massive. It is absolutely massive, a huge part of me. And I was living it out, but not very efficiently or effectively or responsibly. Um, with a whole lot of baggage, so to integrate her into my life, um, there were dangers everywhere, because there had been when I was a child. So, yeah, you got to have patience with yourself with these processes, and you have whatever you have access to is what you have access to in terms of healthy behavior. But the number one thing I think we can all agree to do is to become aware of when we're triggered, when there's an overwhelming urge to blame. Just be aware that you're doing it and ask the question, who is to blame? Who is actually culpable? And who was victimized? What happened? This is a trauma response. And it's probably not this person in front of me. They may have just been, I don't know. The really tricky part is when they're triggered and they attack you from their trigger because they're unconscious and now you're unconscious and now you're both in your unconscious trigger, and he's really mad at his mom and you're really mad at your dad. So you're not talking to your partner. You think you are. So anyway, yes, that's just a quick little primer and how beautiful it is to come into a place. You know what's on the other side of all of this? And before I had this experience, I was like, it didn't, I couldn't, my bell couldn't ring with it. Joy. What's on the other side of this is joy. Because when I reintegrated this part of my inner child, she is the source of my delight in the world. She loves miniature things. And every once in a while, we have a play date where I go to this special store that has a whole section of miniatures that you would put in your garden, and tiny little fences and tiny little gnomes, or I go to the gardens, the nurseries around here, and I go look at the fairy section. Oh, and often this is where your genius is. And this is all connected to life purpose and your work and making money and plugging that part of you in. You exit time. There is a connection between the experience of no time and being a slave of this construct of time. And one of them involves integrating your authentic self, your genie, your genius. And those people out there that just make millions and billions of dollars, they're living in their genius. They're not subject to this time because they've found permission to live in this time. And they've learned their no. No, I will not go do that thing over there just because I'm competent. I'm going to do this thing here because this is what I want to do. And just imagine all of us being in our genius. doing something there because you want to do it. And eventually, that's where we will live because we would do this thing even if we didn't make money. And one day there will be no money. And that's what everyone's going to be doing. Here, let me get in this airplane and fly you somewhere because I love to fly. So there'll be no such thing as buying a plane ticket, you know. There might be trade, you know, "Hey, I'll do this if you do this for me," but, you know, imagine everyone living in their joy like that. So that's all for today. I love you. I'm wondering, why hasn't anyone joined? I have to go check my privacy settings and make sure this is public. So anyway, have a great day. Bye.